The 2023 NFL season is in the books, and while the Bengals came very close to their goal, they didn't quite get there. So, what can we learn from last season's Super Bowl teams that the Bengals can apply next year to get back to the greatest height of the sport?
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. Together, we are the Locked On Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, bringing you coverage of your team every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. So hit the subscribe button on YouTube if you haven't yet. Hit the follow button anywhere you get your podcasts, and you will be notified. Content will be delivered when we upload every day. Today's episode of Locked On Bengals brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. James, the Super Bowl is in the books at this time of the year. Like I said on our pre-Super Bowl show, when we recorded before the Super Bowl had occurred, one of the things that we would often do at this point would be to look at these teams, how they got to the point they got to, and say, what lessons can you take away? And for the Bengals, I think there are fewer lessons than there have been in previous years, because I think there are only a handful of teams that could have won the Super Bowl this year. I still think the Bengals are one of those teams, especially with the way that field played and the way that nobody rushing the passer seemed to be able to keep their feet. And that was certainly one of the scarier things about the Eagles team. But there's still some things that you can take away from the teams in the final game of the year. And one that I've noticed is generating some conversation is, well, at least according to our friend Andrew, PFF Andrew, the Penei Sewell Jamar Chase debate back alive. And that's not what we're going to do today, but we can talk a little bit about the construction of the Chiefs in particular, the Super Bowl victors, with Travis Kelce and a bunch of not top 15 weapons.
Sure. Yeah, you could. And this can be the blueprint that I hope 30 NFL teams take. Just not the one that we cover daily here on Locked On Bengals. And 31 if you want to include the Chiefs. But something tells me that they'll continue to get into the dynamic receiver market and in the weapons market. By the way, they traded for Kadarius Toney in mid-season to hopefully fill some of that role that Tyreek Hill left behind. Why? Because Hill's really, really talented.
And what a play he had in one of Tyreek's old roles on special teams.
On special teams, then he obviously had the touchdown where you or I could have scored. And that's the part of this that I think people are missing. And look, last episode we've talked about Brian Callahan and Zach Taylor and the continuity on the coaching staff, especially on the offensive side. Hopefully it continues with Lou Anarumo. We'll see there as we record this on Monday evening. But to me, the reason it worked for the Chiefs is because Andy Reid, Eric Bieniemy, and whoever the hell else you want to give credit to, schemed up some things where either of us could have made the throws to Sky Moore or Kadarius Toney, and we certainly could have ran the ball in because there was no one within like 10 yards of either guy. And it was just a masterful example, a masterclass of just play calling and scheming guys open and getting guys open in the right spot. And yeah, they have Travis Kelce to use and they have some other weapons, but Patrick Mahomes couldn't ask for much more. So I think that's the difference. And there are only so many Andy Reids, and clearly I thought it might have been his best coached game. I mean, they just balled out in a way that I wasn't necessarily expecting, especially when they were down 24-14, and it felt like the Eagles were in control of that game. They were in control of that game. The Chiefs offense came to play in the second half, and we could talk about the trenches a ton, but I think a big part of it had to do with scheme and play calling.
I think it did, but the great equalizer to me in this game was going to be Philly's front four. I thought they were going to get after Mahomes at every single spot. So one, credit the Kansas City offensive line, right? The Chiefs made a conscientious effort to invest in the position. They made the right choices in the draft. They got great play out of their tackles in this game. They got great assistance from the worst playing surface we'll ever see, I hope, in a Super Bowl, because that was truly atrocious. The cut-ups of Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick just slipping, trying to turn the corner constantly, is embarrassing and a black mark on the game. But that affected both sides, of course. That affected running backs. That affected Patrick Mahomes. It affected the quarterbacks at times. It affected wide receivers. So that affected everybody, right? But it was a really well-called game for Andy Reid, especially in that second half. I just think that the inability for the Eagles to finish pressure or get that quick pressure that they've had, that they're accustomed to. And I know Patrick Mahomes is great at avoiding pressure, getting rid of the ball in a timely fashion and all this stuff. That let Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes do whatever they wanted to do. He was very clean too often. So was Jalen Hurts, for that matter. This is a game where both offensive lines were really good and both offenses scored a ton of points. So I do think that there's something to be said for quality offensive lines, but it's obviously never that simple. You have factors like Andy Reid and the skill players for the Eagles and the speed of the quarterbacks, bum ankle or not, for Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts, and the effective running game of the Chiefs as the Eagles just lived in nickel for the whole game. So there are all these other factors that go into it.
Sure.
But it does come back to the offensive line pretty consistently. And when we're covering the Bengals the way we are, it just makes you want more from the Bengals up front.
Sure. I get it. I understand it. And we'll see what the Bengals do this offseason. The offensive line's a huge topic. Take 3 Chiefs linemen away or 3 Eagles linemen away. I mean, that's the part of this where it's comparing the Chiefs this year and their offensive line to the Bengals at the end of the year when they played the Chiefs. That's not the equal comparison. Comparing them to the Bengals line to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl against Tampa Bay when they were down 3 starters, that's closer. And I think the Chiefs were in worse shape than the Bengals, to be quite clear, but in that year and using that. So there's no perfect comparison here. But I don't want to go overboard with the offensive line and pretend that the Bengals offensive line sucked all year, because they didn't. They just got beat up and lost. Like, they lost guys. And there aren't many lines that can deal with 3 starters being out in the postseason and win 2 playoff games, 1 on the road, and then go on the road again and be a drive away. And I get it. I'm not saying don't invest in the offensive line. I just think it's wild for people if they do have the narrative of, man, it's another year and the Bengals still haven't. Well, yes, they have. They did address it. Was it perfect? No, it wasn't perfect. They're still trying to catch up from bad drafting of offensive linemen. And Cordell Volson was the first step at that. They're still going to have to draft well in that offensive line room for the foreseeable future to turn things around. And by the way, that's why the Chiefs were able to retool things so quickly. So we'll see if the Bengals can do that in April. So that, if we want to talk about that, sure, I totally agree that offensive line-wise, with anybody out there that's thinking that the Bengals need to invest in the offensive line and continue to grow that position group.
And a big part of the Chiefs' success, like you said, is hitting on offensive linemen in the draft. Andrew Wiley at right tackle, even playing well, but Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith, the highlights there. Now, imagine if the Bengals had just drafted those 2 guys.
Creed
How
Humphrey
different
was right there. 46.
How different would it be?
They picked Carmen. Yeah, I totally agree with you. It would have been, if you would have taken Chase and Humphrey, picks 1, 2, after taking in the first 3 rounds, and you could add aside of that if you want to, because he's been good. But if you do that a year after taking Burrow, Higgins, and Logan Wilson, I mean, that would probably be the best 1 through 3 in back-to-back years that they've ever had ever. And it's been 2 years for that 21 class.
Yeah. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. More lessons, though. More topics, I should say. They're not necessarily lessons learned. They're not necessarily lessons from the Super Bowl, but they are topics for conversation that we can get into. Like, how important is it for the Bengals to go get a high-end tight end? And again, coming back to Joe Mixon, some discussion around aggression on 4th downs and Should they spend more money on the offensive line? These are all things that we can continue to talk about as we reflect on the year that was in the NFL. So we'll continue to do that coming up next.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. When you're at your best, you can do great things, but sometimes life gets you bogged down and you may feel overwhelmed or like you're not showing up in the way that you want to. Well, working with a therapist can help you get closer to the best version of you, because when you feel empowered, you feel more prepared to take on everything in life, and you're more prepared to take on everything that life throws at you. And if you've thought about giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is a great option. It's convenient, flexible, affordable, and entirely online. All you do is fill out a questionnaire, and they're going to pair you with a therapist that fits you best. And you could change therapists at any time. So if you're not gelling with that initial therapist, it is no problem. You can find the right person to help you. And like I said, all it is a brief questionnaire. And if you want to feel more empowered and live a more empowered life, therapy can get you there. So visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
Let's start with the tight end conversation, James, because both of these teams in the Super Bowl had really good tight ends.
Well, one might be the GOAT. One might be the GOAT.
I mean, there's certainly an argument there, and there's always recency bias with these sorts of things, but he's right up there if he's not the guy.
He's up there, which is crazy. I was at his pro day way back in 2013. I never thought that he would be in that conversation, but hasn't slowed down. Is clearly their best weapon, and it's just wild how the impact he has every week.
It's a testament to the nature of the position as well. Travis Kelce is picked at the top of the 3rd round, coming from a small school, didn't have great size, had good size, not great size coming out of UC as measured at the combine, but had really good explosion in his testing numbers, okay agility, not incredible agility, and obviously has worked incredibly hard and is and developed into a very smart player, very savvy player over his years, 10 years now, right? In the NFL, drafted in 2013.
And he was a quarterback early on in college. And so they moved him to tight end. And so the learning curve, right? And just not being targeted a ton. His quarterback was Munchie Legault. So it wasn't like that was an offense that was putting up huge passing numbers. And I'm not being mean to Munchie, but it took him a little time to develop in the NFL. And I think part of it was just lack of use in college. And having Andy Reid certainly helps.
Dallas Goedert, another hyper athletic tight end with above average, not great size, who had some injuries that he dealt with early in his career, was behind Zach Ertz, certainly couldn't line up in line early in his career. And both of these guys really are best used as receivers and not as blockers. When are the Bengals going to be the team that drafts the hyper athletic tight end?
This year. This year. I really do. I think it's a deep tight end class, and I don't know when it'll be. Maybe it is. Maybe the guy you're thinking of, and I'm not even going to name names, even though, of course, there are people that are thinking of certain names. Maybe a Notre Dame tight end at the top of or at the first round if he falls past the top of the first round and into the Bengals at the bottom half or at the end of the round. But if it's not him, there's plenty of tight ends that they can grab, and maybe they go the route that they did with Uzomah and Croft, where they draft 2, depending on what happens in free agency. I would not be shocked at that at all. If it's a deep position, that's an area that they could use. So they need it, and they need it because it just opens up things offensively. And when you have a guy like Burrow, much like a Mahomes, certainly Hurts has benefited from it. You see how offensively, what a difference it could make, especially because I don't know how long you're going to have Tyler Boyd. He has 1 more year left on his contract. And so getting another younger weapon in the mix is certainly something that would be nice, especially because you're right. It does take these guys some time to develop in most instances.
And you're probably not finding a guy that's Travis Kelce. Like, never bank on getting a guy that's Travis Kelce, especially after the catch. He's a very special player in a number of ways. His ability to get open, his consistency as a receiver, his run after catch ability, I think, is the thing that really separates him. But if you're looking for like the hyper athletic guy this year, that seems to be Luke Musgrave from Oregon State. Not necessarily the Michael Mayer Notre Dame product, although he's very productive. Mayer.
Yeah.
Pronunciation of names, season, James.
Yeah, he's from here, so I'm sure some listeners would be mad if I didn't fix it. That's all.
They're just so mad at me all the time. Don't know the Cincinnati guys' names properly. Michael Mayer from Notre Dame, not necessarily the freak athlete at the position, though, but a guy that you could line up in line and feel comfortable with that. More refined as a blocker, a little bit bigger.
I could see him falling, if he doesn't test out of this world and surprise that way. And you never know.
I mean, it's on their radar. It was on their radar last year.
It was.
They wanted to draft the tight end, and it didn't quite go their way.
And it was a shallow class last year. I mean, this lines up with the need. It really does.
So does running back.
Mm-hmm. Let's get to it.
Strong-looking running back class.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at Super Bowl teams, you look at the the leading rusher in the Super Bowl, going back to 2009, Locked On Zone Marcus Mosher with the tweet, the highest paid Super Bowl leading rusher in the last, 14 years, 15 years? I don't know how math works, is Percy Harvin. Now, this is on the team that was paying Marshawn Lynch, but Marshawn Lynch was not the leading rusher for the Seahawks in that game. So for Super Bowl winners, you don't pay running backs. Marshawn Lynch accepted. Mm-hmm. And if you do pay running backs, they're not your leading rusher in the Super Bowl. See Marshawn Lynch in 2013. So we've talked a lot about this topic with Joe Mixon. And I do want to point out, and I also tweeted about this today, the Bengals, according to PFF, have one of the lowest rushing yards expected in the NFL this year, bottom 3 in the NFL. So just another thing to consider when we're talking about Joe Mixon's stats. The Bengals weren't necessarily doing him any favors in terms of, yards per carry. Mm-hmm. But we've also talked about the cap number and the offensive philosophy of this team and the need to be more dynamic and explosive. And just look at Isaiah Pacheco last night, right? In the Super Bowl for an example of what that element can look like. And we're
Jerick McKinnon.
Jerick McKinnon, of course. But
it's a huge part of what they do. Yeah.
You're looking at rookies, and in one case, a late round pick, or low dollar contracts. Mm-hmm. None of the running backs in that game were huge investments for their team.
And Boston Scott is a fun one for Philly. It's made some dynamic plays. Obviously, he's not an every down runner. I could totally see the Bengals going this route. And if there is a blueprint, like the Chiefs have shown, it's that. It's maybe you just have a trifecta, a trio of running backs that alternate and fit really well with what you do inside your offense. And, one guy that does that is Samaje Perine. So could that be one of the 3? And then you go from there. Would it be a Travion Williams? You bring him back as well. Do you think that Joe Mixon is willing to take a pay cut? Are you really willing to bring him back for that money? I wouldn't be. I think that's the cost analysis versus what you're getting. I think you can find it elsewhere, especially in a deep running back class. And maybe end up drafting 2. I'm not saying they draft one in the first round. I know Bengals Twitter has debated that. I don't think they necessarily need to do that. And we can talk about that in the future. But I certainly think that tight end, running back, speed, athleticism, I think they'll be able to find that in this draft if that's what they're looking for.
We have the duo, really, of the veteran minimum Jerick McKinnon and the 7th round pick. And, of course, they recently spent a premium draft pick on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So can Clyde Edwards-Helaire be the post? I think he has a year on his deal, right? Or maybe 2.
He's got 1 left. So I don't think they would cut him. They won't cut him, right?
They might. So is that your Jerick McKinnon equivalent for the Bengals, right? Your post hype.
I'll break the news right
injured
now.
guy.
If Clyde Edwards-Helaire is available, I would expect him to end up in Cincinnati.
Maybe
I'm wrong, but I would expect it. Not think that there's a chance. I would expect it to happen. Like if he becomes a free agent, not a trade. The Bengals aren't trading with the Chiefs. I don't mean that.
Could be the Bengals version of the Jerick McKinnon, and then a 7th-round pick or a 6th-round pick, and then you bring Samaje Perine back for that veteraniness. Is that a plan? Maybe. I don't know. There's a lot of ifs there.
Maybe a 3rd or 4th rounder. Maybe it's a 2nd rounder. They love 2nd-round backs, but
they do.
That CEH, I know he gets along really well with Joe Burrow. So you never know. We'll continue though with some of our other Super Bowl takeaways. Look at us just talking tight end and running back. This is offensive show. I love it. But some more of our Super Bowl 57 takeaways coming up next. But today's show is also brought to you by Built Bar, because if you're looking for a delicious treat and you don't want all of the fat and calories that come with most of them, well, you got to try a Built Bar. I talk about them all the time. You know it if you listen to this show. Built Bars are the #1 protein bar on the planet. High in protein, low in sugar, low in calories, and they taste like a candy bar. So you don't sacrifice taste. You're not sacrificing health. And well, you're getting that protein punch you need, whether it's midday in between meetings, whether it's after a workout, whether it's after your latest podcast episode, or maybe just after or while you're listening to Locked On Bengals. You need to grab a Built Bar today. And whether you go to built.com to order your Built Bars or your nearest Walmart or Sam's Club, oh, that's right, you can get them in store today as well. Make sure you check them out now and thank me later. Built Bar, the #1 protein bar on the planet.
Got another one of your favorite topics, James, to kick off our conclusion to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Receivers.
Let's go, baby.
We hit on this a little bit early. The Chiefs, they got Juju Smith-Schuster, they got Kadarius Toney, they have some budget options, as it were, at wide receiver. They have Travis Kelce, of course. They have Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. We've talked about all that. The Eagles drafted Devontae Smith.
Yep.
Traded for A.J. Brown.
Yep.
And both of those guys made massive plays.
Yep.
And were huge parts of the reason that offense took off this year, that Jalen Hurts took off this year, that the Eagles were in the Super Bowl, that the Eagles had a chance to win the Super Bowl.
No doubt. And it's why if the Chiefs had kicked the field goal and the call didn't happen that happened, then there's a real good shot that we're seeing overtime, or maybe they go down and score. Maybe they score and that Mahomes gets the ball back because the Eagles have scored so quickly.
Like, we have 18 seconds all over again.
Maybe, right? I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. And so that's the crappy part about that call. But anyways, yeah, that's the part of this where you could talk about lines and all of that. But the thing that the Bengals have certainly gotten right is what they've put around Joe Burrow at the receiver position. And tight end has been fine, but can you do better than fine? Maybe. We'll see if they do that this offseason. Running back has been, I would say, below average, especially compared to what the resources you're allocating. But receiver, they've nailed it. And Titans fans, well, you should be crying because Ryan Tannehill is never, ever, never, ever, ever, ever going to be able to overcome not having 1,000 weapons around him. He needs all of the weapons. He needs the most weapons in the history of the league, and then you'd have a shot. Well, you just got rid of your best one, and he made a hell of a grab in the Super Bowl. And when that happened, I was like, man, they are rolling, because Devontae Smith was getting going early, and then it was Goddard, and then the deep ball to Brown. And it was just the full allotment of weapons. Obviously, Hurts was doing things on the ground as well and making plays. So they're a dynamic offense, and that was a heck of a trade. And that is why, if I'm the Bengals, I'm certainly doing everything I can, and I think they will, but I'm doing everything I can to keep T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow together, that trio together long-term.
Mm-hmm. And maybe the rest changes, right? But if you have those three guys and you have that core, right? Maybe they do become a 12 personnel team, right? And you have your two dynamic alpha wide receivers outside. You invest in the tight end position a little bit.
On rookie deals, yeah, no doubt. I could see
that. And you
that.
get that new running back blood in there. You figure out your running game a little bit, because it's not just running back that's a problem for the Bengals. It's also just the run game on the whole just needs to be better. And they found some of that efficiency as the year went on. But it wasn't just the running back was the point I was trying to make earlier when I was talking about rushing yards over expected and the fewest expected rushing yards for this Bengals offense. But you're right, James. I think that there's another great argument in this game to keep those guys. It shows that there's multiple ways to build a team. And for the Bengals, what works with Joe Burrow is having those outside dominant number one type receivers in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And they bring different skill sets and, another feather in the cap of keep both of those guys, which is a pretty easy argument to make, especially because they still have space. I know Burrow's contract is coming and T's contract is coming and Jamar's contract is coming. They still have space for a short-term solution at right tackle. And then they need to hit draft picks. Like we said earlier, they need to hit draft picks on the offensive line. You can't have what they've had since 2015, 2016. They need to get back to drafting the Kevin Zeitlers and the Andrew Whitworths and the Eric Steinbachs and Clint Bowling. Sure, we'll take those too. That kind of player. And so that's what's going to be important in the draft in the future. But yeah, I mean,
and maybe Jordan, maybe the next Jordan Shipley, maybe find a slot machine. Could you imagine Jordan Shipley? Which people are going to be like, are you kidding? He got injured and was never the same. And he's pretty good that rookie year in 2010. Imagine him catching passes from Joe Burrow in a healthy in year 2, year 3. It would be pretty good. So
it would be similar, probably a bit worse than Tyler Boyd, right?
Yeah. I'm just saying shifty slot receiver. Yeah. They're going to have to get cheaper at some of these spots. Mm-hmm. That's why we talk about running back. It's not like I don't like Joe Mixon. It'd be great if Joe Mixon's on the team. Not saying that. For the price, you look at the price and you're like, was it worth that? No. The answer is no. And
can they spend that money elsewhere and be better?
And I'm not knocking Boyd either. I don't necessarily think he gets extended if they plan on extending Higgins this offseason, Burrow this offseason, and Chase next offseason. That's all.
That is the business aspect of it. That is the zero-sum game of the salary cap that we talk about with some of these other places they'll need to spend money.
What were the FanDuel odds on Jordan Shipley being mentioned in this show? Because whoever had them, whoever wagered on that just made a lot of rich. They're rich right now.
That's like at least 10 Bitcoins. I don't know what a Bitcoin is worth right now. I'm trying to be fellow kids here. It's a lot of money.
Who was their first round pick the year they drafted Jordan Shipley? You remember? It's okay if you don't.
You said it was 2010?
Yeah.
Was 2010 not the AJ Green, Andy Dalton draft?
No. Jermaine Gresham was their first round.
Oh, that was 2011.
Green and Dalton were 2011. Yeah.
Okay.
You're close.
I was just thinking, I thought it was a trick question.
No?
One other big takeaway for me in this game is 1, never punt. And 2, if you have to punt, hit a good punt. The Eagles choosing to punt when they're trailing, and I know they're deep in their own territory. They're 4th and 2, I think. They haven't been moving the ball great in the second half. They're losing. There's 10 minutes left in the game. He's been great at going for it on 4th down all year, has Nick Sirianni, and this offense, and that QB sneak that nobody stopped, including in this game all year. And then they punt. And then they hit a Drew Chrisman in the clutch in the AFC Championship game quality punt against the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kadarius Toney takes back and essentially wins the game on the spot. And the Eagles get back and they tie it, of course, but really puts them behind the 8 ball. They kept themselves in 3rd and 4th and short the whole game, and then they were aggressive and went for it early and often. And that was a huge reason that they stayed in that game the way that they did. Because the Chiefs would have gotten off the field several times on 3rd down if the Eagles weren't the kind of team to go for it on 4th down all the time.
Who else was taken in the 2010 draft? 2 notable Bengals. I know you're not focused on it. I'm not trying to make you look silly. I think listeners would want me to mention this. 1, because 1 just got a ring. Carlos Dunlap was their 2nd round pick in between Gresham and Shipley. And then Sergino Atkins in the 4th round.
Yeah, what do those guys have to do with this? I'm confused.
just talking about the 2010 draft. I just figured I would mention it.
I'm like fully thinking about fourth down decision making.
Two of the best draft picks in Bengals history. I mean, Geno might be the best. He's so great. So
okay, but did you hear the stuff about going for it on fourth down?
Sure, absolutely did. Did you?
All right.
I heard you. I just wanted to make that. Well, you're about to send us out here. I didn't have to necessarily react to that. You made your point. I
thought there was going to be some special teamer in there or something that was going to be relevant that I wasn't thinking about. I don't know, man.
No. I just, man, if you mention Jermaine Gresham and Jordan Shipley, you can't not mention Dunlap and Geno Atkins in the same draft. That's just rude.
It was one of the Bengals' better drafts, for sure. That didn't feature a number 1 overall quarterback, which they've had 2 of.
Obviously. Atkins and Dunlap obviously played. I mean, Gresham was a 2-time Pro Bowler. But
Gresham
that's the
was
argument.
Not like a terrible player. He's fine. He was a first-round tight end in a draft that had other really good tight ends.
Yep, the injury part of it. I don't think he was as athletic as they were hoping he would be post-injury.
Anyway, we're going 2 separate directions.
Go for it on fourth down. Let's go.
There it is. Invest in the trenches. Go for it on fourth down. Don't overspend at running back. Have good weapons. Get a tight end. Is that everything? The other thing that I want to throw in, just a quick throw in at the end, is Lou Anarumo is apparently a finalist for the Arizona job. Continuity on defense does matter. We saw Steve Spagnuolo's defense do what Lou Anarumo's defense did all year and find ways to adjust in the second half when they needed to make big plays to win the game. And those are 2 of the longer tenured defensive coaches in the NFL. So we'll see what happens with Lou.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. It seems pretty much really up in the air right now, and wish him the best. At the same time, man, if you bring that entire staff back, that would be nice too. So we'll see what happens. I think we'll know by the next time we record.
We'll probably know by the time we publish this episode, because that's the way this business tends to work, as we're about to hit publish at about 7:15 p.m. Eastern time, give or take. On Monday night, we'll see when we get those decisions for the Arizona coaching job. We'll certainly talk about the fallout for the Bengals either way. And we appreciate you listening again to an episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. We got to get into the draft in the near future. We got to get into free agency some more as well, as those are the next stops. Free agency about a month away, considering February is a short month. March 15th, new league year starts, and we're on to 2023. Until next time, Bengals fans, again, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.